All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Who are you? Is this your first time to the show? If so, let me welcome you. Everyone else, what's up? How is everyone doing? It's kind of a loaded question most of the time because it depends. It depends on where your mind's been at in the moments or minutes or days leading up to being asked the question. Like if you were just watching the news before you hit play and started listening to this, and then I ask you how you're doing, you're probably not feeling like you're doing all that well because there's quite a bit of doom and gloom afoot. Lots to be afraid of, lots of injustice to not be able to make sense of. But if you are like me and you've been more successful at not putting all your attention on that news, which, it's a mixed bag. Some part of me feels like, oh, you don't want to put your head in the sand. And I'm certainly not. I'm paying attention. I'm a bit of a political news junkie, which you wouldn't necessarily know because these days it's not like stuff I talk about on the show. In the old days, if you go back far enough in the archives, you can hear me spouting off on all kinds of stuff. But I've come to think better of that. And actually, it's something that we're going to talk about in a coming episode. But truth be told, I have been quite consumed with just holding it down at the new center. Regular listeners know I opened a yoga center 3 weeks ago. I just finished 3 weeks and I had my first L, my first loss. I don't know if you know that term, W's and L's. Maybe it's like a younger generation term. If you haven't heard it before, it's wins and losses, W's and L's. Well, I had one L and it's not that bad, but basically if you were here last week, I think it was, or maybe the week before, I was talking about my weekly schedule that I posted. That back in 2007, before we all had phones and stuff, I had a weekly schedule that I posted. Just said Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and it had the times for each day. It didn't say the name of the month or what the number day of the month was. It didn't have like we have now when we look at our Google calendars or our iPhone calendar apps. And back in 2007, until at least, it was about 2015, I'd say. No, actually, all the way through 2007 to 2017, I had that same weekly schedule posted, and nobody was confused. Nobody was confused by that. But now in 2024, I do the exact same thing. And in the last 3 weeks, I've had at least 3 people contact me saying, I'm on the website and I'm confused. Is there class today? Because it doesn't say what the number of each day is. And, this morning, I just kind of got over myself a little bit on it because I think that I don't like the aesthetics of the Google Calendar, and I don't want to pay more money to have some separate app that I have to use to make it look the way that I want it to look. But the reality is, in a couple of weeks, in November, there's a holiday and then there's Christmas. And so I'm going to have to take some days off. It's 3 weeks in and I haven't taken a day off yet, but eventually I'm going to have to take some days off. And I was thinking about that and, I'll post it in the announcements. But then basically what that's going to mean is someone's going to see, an announcement. There's no class on these days and these days. And then below that is this weekly schedule that doesn't reflect that. That means they got to like refer back to their calendar app. The whole thing just was a losing battle. I'm trying to get back to something that it just no longer exists. People don't relate to the schedules in the same way. We all have the phones, and this morning I decided, I was like, you know what? Just put up the Google Calendar. It's more convenient. It's in real time. Just do it. And then literally I got a text from somebody, another person who was saying, I can't figure out the schedule. Is there class? And I just said, all right, that's it. I give up. The Google Calendar's up there. So what are you going to do? It's like Amazon. At some point, it's a losing battle. And you know what? I'm going to take the L here, but I had a couple of big W's also. And one of those W's was that I had my first day where like I hit the number. And I'm trying not to think about the numbers so much, but basically I figured out that if I can average 3 to 4 students per class, then I will be making enough money at the yoga center to make it worth my while to be doing it. That before the pandemic, I had a pretty good balance of like income that was coming from in-person teaching and income that was coming from online. But then the pandemic came and it all went online. And then since then, I haven't been able to get a good balance from doing the traveling anymore. So if I can get 3 to 4 students per class in a room that holds 8 or 9, I will get to the bottom end of what I was making in person before the world fell apart and feel like I'm in a healthier footing. And in the first 2 weeks, I had some classes where I had 3, a couple of 3s, I had a few 2s, and then a bunch of 1 person came. But I never had like a full day until this week. I had one day where the morning class, I had 4 people in it. And then in the afternoon, I had 3. And I was like, that's it. That's all I need. And it felt like a momentous occasion. But more importantly than the numbers or the money was the makeup of those classes. Who was in those classes? I had my first college students come. I do live in a neighborhood that's adjacent to Lafayette College. And I was wondering whether or not any of the college kids would come. I had my first yoga class when I was in college. And sure enough, on this day where I hit the number for the first time, I also had my first college students. I had 1 in the morning. This lovely woman came, sophomore. And then my highlight of the week was the second class, which had 3 people in it. One of them was Virginia, my new friend, who is 82 and recovering from lung cancer. But I might add she's moving remarkably well given that circumstance. And we had a couple of 1-to-1s. She's been coming a couple times a week since I opened. And she was joined in that class by 2 senior baseball players from Lafayette. These big dudes who were just pretty open and cool. And I think I've had it in mind that maybe the college kids wouldn't be into it because I'm like old and I do gentle, and like maybe college kids want something more kick-ass than I'm doing. But they were really open and cool, and they were coming in because they want to like increase their mobility leading up to their season. And the best part was after class, they hung around. Both of the classes, in the morning and in the afternoon, people hung around and talked. And they talked about like real stuff. Like even some conversations that felt like they were difficult topics about like pandemic stuff and whatever, but it was really great. People hung around and talked. And I just felt like this is it. This is why I'm doing it. So that was huge. Huge W's. And that's what I'm staying focused on. Those actual moments and realities, and not on these big other abstract narratives that are hard to discern. So I don't know how you're doing. I hope that you're managing to find yourself some things that you can focus on that seem to foster experiences you want to have. One thing that I have been doing is drawing inspiration from teachers who've managed to hold it down for even longer than myself, which includes my guest today, Coombes. She and I were brought together by our mutual friend Norman Blair, and I speak with her some about why I think Norman thought it was a good idea for us to come together. So I won't say anything about it now. I'll just let you listen to that. But I think that she is an example of someone who has managed to stick to her yoga through all the twists and turns of the world over many a decades for longer than myself. And it was a real pleasure to have a chance to connect with her. And I'm very happy to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me mention that if you are getting something of value from this show, if you've learned something from listening to an episode, or you just enjoy the kind of camaraderie of inquiring into yoga that happens here, and you look forward to new episodes, and you're not already a podcast premium subscriber, I want to ask you to consider doing that. Not everybody knows that the most recent 52 episodes of the show are always in their full length on the free public feed. But there is also a quite extensive archive of almost 400 more episodes that are first half free on the public feed. But if you become a podcast premium subscriber, you get access to the full length archives. But more than that, to be real, it's the way that this podcast brings in any income. We used to do ads and do a lot of that in the past, and that was a real drag. So the only way that it really generates income of itself is from listeners like you who appreciate it and decide to give $5 or $10 a month to become a podcast premium subscriber. And I just want to make sure you are aware that that's the situation, and again, encourage you to become a supporter and subscribe. Also, there's other ways we can connect. If you want to do some practice together, or you want to be part of a weekly discussion group, or maybe you want to get into some of the on-demand videos I've got, all of my stuff, the podcast premium subscription and the rest, can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all, we are going to leave it there. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Coombes. Hello, are you there?
Hi, Jay.
Hi, Sheila.
Hiya, what's the sound like when you're in?
I think I can hear you okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you really well, thank you. Yes, indeed.
All right. Well, hello, Sheila. I'm Jay. Nice to meet you. Do you like to be called She or Sheila?
I like to be called She.
Oh, I like the way it sounds. Nice to meet you, She. I don't know if you've listened to the show. I am recording already. And if it's okay with you, I want to consider ourselves having just begun. Would that be all right?
Yeah, that's fine. You carry on.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you so much for taking up my invitation and giving me this time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking me, because I was quite surprised, really. It was Norman who suggested that we get put together in a sense and see where we go on that. And I, never done this kind of thing before, so it's all new to me. Well, I'm very familiar with teaching on Zoom, though, so I'm quite used to that.
I see. Well, we can get to that. And yes, let us shout out Norman. He's been sending all kinds of wonderful people my way to speak with. And I think that the reason why Norman does that is because he really seems to get a sense of like what the spirit of this show is about, or at least what I intend for it to be about.
Yeah.
And I'll say a few things as to why I think you're here today and why I'm excited to speak with you.
Okay.
I would say, more recently, people listening to the show know this, that coming out of the pandemic and everything being online, you just said, oh, now you're familiar with being on Zoom. I think there's been a bit of a backlash, or really in certain ways, like what I recognized as like the yoga world before the pandemic is completely gone. I had a yoga center for 10 years in Brooklyn, New York. And I sort of saw the way that yoga centers kind of went the way of like gyms and became memberships, like I always say we went from like church basements and town halls to like these big storefront, spa operations or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I
noticed that too. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Well, no, I just recently, in the last, literally a week ago, opened a yoga center in my neighborhood, and it's very small. It maybe fits about 8 people. And I've had all these like folks coming, and you know how we've been doing it with a cigar box full of cash and people just doing a sign-in sheet and making their own change. And you're laughing because you remember when that was the only way it was done,
Yeah, right. That's right. Yes, indeed, it was. You were like, I remember. I remember the first yoga class I ever attended, which was in, oh goodness me, 1970 something or other. Was in London, and there wasn't such thing as yoga clothes. There was no clothes to put on in particular. So we just took our clothes off, and we stripped down to our underwear and went on to lie on these kind of pieces of foam covered in Indian cloth, because there weren't any yoga mats either. And we just had a yoga class. So we just went through the door, stripped our clothes off, left them on the floor, walked in, did the class, went out, put them back on again and left.
Wow. Before there was yoga clothes, there was your underwear.
Yeah, the yoga clothes was the underwear, yeah. So
Well, I mean, that is very much to my point. And I will say this, that there's really one thing that the show is very much about, which is one reason why you're here, which is just, I think of it as a place to kind of set oral history. I'm kind of amazed by the diversity of people who have like made yoga a life's purpose of sorts and have stuck to it over decades and decades. So I fancy this a place where I get to speak with people who are like that and kind of set some of their stories down for prosperity's sake. And also for me, I've been doing this for 9 years now. And I would say the thing that really fuels it for me is that the conversations also very much fit into like wherever my inquiry is and sort of like what I need in the moment. Right. And I do feel that way about speaking with you. You've kind of come in a series of conversations of people like yourself who came into yoga well before it was a thing and are still at it after all these decades. And for me, opening this center, there's some fear that like, oh, can we do it the old ways, or like, is that gone completely? And so it's been very affirming for me to speak with people like yourself who've been in it for so long. So that's a little bit of a long-winded way to introduce why I think you're here. Again, it's just a pleasure to have this moment with you, and I appreciate your time.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. Yeah, no, I really appreciate you asking me, actually, because the thing about Norman is I'll tell you how old I am. I'm 81. I'm incredibly fit. I don't have any medication. I don't even register with a doctor. I think yoga for me has kept me this way from most of my life because it's been my practice for all these years. And when people say to me something like, well, you don't look your age, or are you sure you don't take any medication or anything? And I say, no. And I owe it all to yoga. I owe so much to yoga, Jay. I owe so much to yoga. And I really think, had I not come upon yoga all those years ago, and that story that I told you just now, was my first class. I was walking down the road in Earl's Court in London, and there was a sign saying yoga class, and it seemed to be the time that it was happening right there and then, 10 in the morning, I think. And I just walked in and joined, and I never looked back from there. That was my very first introduction, really. And
so wait, you didn't have any. Did you know anybody who was into yoga, or where do you think the impetus came from in you? Why did you randomly decide to go to a yoga class because you saw a sign?
Well, I was in a sort of place where I was living in Australia, actually, and I was over in England just on a break. Came over with my very young son, and so I emigrated to Australia when I was 20, with a £10 POM basically. And Australia's always been a bit behind the times with everything else. I don't think it is anymore, but then it was. So it was quite an antiquated place to go to. But I did meet somebody who talked about yoga and talked about meditation. There was nothing there available, nothing at all. But I just had this, this kind of idea that I needed something which was a bit, not mainstream in the sense of what everybody else was doing, which was basically drinking far too much and doing all the other things we were doing in Sydney at the time, making money, doing all that kind of stuff, very commercial sort of place. And when I was traveling in London, I was starting to meet people who were hippies, basically. And that's where the yoga came in, because the in quotes, hippies who grew their hair long, they did smoke a bit of weed, and they did that kind of stuff, and they wanted an alternative lifestyle, which was not one which was to do with, what
office jobs, right?
Yeah, well, we did work. I mean, definitely we did work, but we traveled. We kind of traveled around, and I traveled for many years, actually, from place to place. And I took yoga with me, and I took my knowledge of alternative medicine, herbalism and stuff like that, which I'm also very much into, with me. And I became a bit of a barefoot doctor around the place with my knowledge I had. Of the body and everything, which So I don't know what drew. I just it was one of those serendipity things. I put a sign on the door, saw yoga, thought, oh, that sounds interesting. Went in, and I was hooked from then on.
All right, so when you shed your clothes and went to that yoga class, which today would be considered unthinkable. It'd be unthinkable that we would say, oh, could you take off your clothes before you come into class? When you did that, I'm wondering, because I've seen you write, or maybe I saw you speak in one yoga class that you have online that I saw. You mentioned sort of the emphasis on the physical practice that has come about over time. But I'm curious, back then when you shed your clothes, did you in your mind think of it as more physical exercise, or was it being presented to you as much more of like meditation and like a spiritual practice?
Well, it was interesting, really, because the guy who was running the class was absolutely gorgeous. He wore, I think he was the attractive bit of it, really. He had no shirt on, and he had long white Indian trousers, Indian pants, and he had long blonde hair, shoulder length hair, and he was about just about 30, I think, that kind of age. I was about 28. I was about similar age as well. And he was taking the class, and it was a very traditional Satchinanda, Shivananda style of class, where you started with, salute to the sun 12 times, then a relaxation, then he went through, all the ways of moving the body, finishing with shoulder stand, headstand, or headstand, shoulder stand, that was the way around. And then relaxation at the end. So it was very physical, and I liked that. I was very bendy. I'm slightly hypermobile, so that attracted me in that way of feeling body beautiful and in these amazing poses, And so I was attracted by the physical, really, but it was also very Indian, in quotes. So not necessarily spiritual, but Indian. And then we were looking for something alternative to believe in, to follow. You know, everybody's looking for the guru, the master, the somebody the wise person who could, you know, give us some kind of purpose in life, really, because we were that, I was a little bit older than a lot of people, but we were that generation who had gone through the end of the war, the last war, come through a period of, you know, austerity, really. And then suddenly everything was taking off. And we didn't want to buy into that stuff, but we didn't know where else to go. We were kind of a lost generation, really. Does that make sense?
No, it does. I think I've heard that echoed in other people's stories. And interesting, because you said something to believe in. And as a Westerner who's embraced yoga too, it did seem to, for me as well, that like I didn't grow up with like a religious foundation or anything like that. I like rejected the religion of my parents. I thought it was hypocritical. And so Eastern spirituality felt more expansive, like it was more possible, but it still had something ancient and sacred. And like you said, something to believe in.
Yeah, it made more sense. It just makes more sense that, you know, and I'm a great one for following and teaching the sutras, the Yoga Sutras, because I can never go along with this idea of there being heaven. So heaven, when you die, you can be happy and have a good time and all about now. I've always really been sort of, well, you need to live one's life now to the best of your ability. And that really is what the sutras to me are about. They're about, you know, with the yamas and niyamas, is how you behave with the environment, how you behave with yourself, and then you come onto your postures. And it's a whole way of life. And it's not because there's any God there that's going to give you a hard time if you disobey any of these, you know, sutras. It's more like you're just going to feel bad. And I really get that one. You know, I know that if I tell a lie, I won't feel good about that. You know, it will sit inside me as something that I've not been in, you know, in my integrity. I have done something with that, you know, and if I take something that somebody else's, even if it's their time or their conversation, it will make me feel bad. And I think that's the whole, just makes sense. It's to me.
Yes, it becomes very obvious when you're making your determinations based on your experiences. Like similarly to me, like I rejected dogma of any sort, really. and yet I have certainly found the sutras to be this invaluable document as well, because as you say, if you're just observing your experience and you observe how it feels to lie to people or to steal things, you could very obviously go, oh, that feels horrible. I don't want to feel that way. So if I want to feel the way I want to feel more, then I'm not going to lie and I'm not going to steal, you know? So there's sort of universal principles that I think the sutras seem to reflect, and many of us take some guidance from, you know? I guess I'm curious. Okay, so going from being a young, bendy you in your underwear, taking Shivananda classes with the cute guy with the long hair, how do you get to a more, like you just talked about the sutras, which is when yoga kind of takes hold and you become more interested and you study more, when do you start to become more interested in and study more deeply?
Right. Yeah, well, you're picking up on my thoughts there, really, because I was just thinking along, what do I really owe my journey to? And that's a guy you might have come across. He used to be called Maharaja. He now goes by his given family name, which is Prem Rawat. And is in the very early days. He was the boy guru. Came across to England from India. We went to America first when he was 15. And he was like following in his father's footsteps. And he said he would take his meditation, not yoga per se, but it does use some of the ancient like mudras from a long time, the ancient mudras of the teachings. He would take that out of India and spread it around the world, which he's still doing. He's 60 something now. And I came across him, and it was at that funny time when, so I'd been practicing with this class I told you about, and then I took yoga traveling. And I did so many things when I was traveling, and some of them were not that good, and some of them were very good. A mixed bag, really. And when I came back to England, and how old was I then? It was in 1977, and I've been traveling a long time from 69. Yeah. Mm. And I'd been taking yoga with me, and I was practicing a lot on my own. I used to do like 3 hours of asana a day, which is rather extreme, actually. And I had this question of how can I feel like the way I feel at the end of a practical session, which is just wonderful and so focused and, peaceful, etc., all the buzzwords. How can I feel like this more? And there is an expression, isn't there, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Mm-hmm. If you come across that.
Yes.
And into my life came this Maharaji. And he was offering these techniques of what he calls knowledge of self, knowledge of the self. And I took that up, as well as, still practicing physical yoga, and took that up. And I've been doing that ever since as well. And then there's a process where you receive the techniques of the learning process for a few years first, and then you can ask for those techniques. And they are given to you for no payment. And it's a practice, that's my meditational practice, which still carries me through. So I've got the both of them, really.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so I'm not familiar with this teacher that you're referencing.
No.
Does he come from a particular tradition, or like what kind of viewpoint does he hold in terms of philosophy and like maybe even practice?
Well, he doesn't come from not anything particular. He just comes from a lineage in India, and I think it's Dehradun where he was born. Hmm. So his father beforehand, whose name was Sri Hansji, he too had, and it's handed from father to son down this lineage going back a few hundred years. So there's not a particular name as in like Shivananda or any of the names that we know.
No brand name, huh? No brand name?
No branding, no. No branding. Nothing. You don't wear any special clothes. You don't have to do anything. It doesn't cost any money. You don't have to live a certain way. There's no prescriptions on. You don't have to be vegetarian or anything. I've been vegetarian longer than I've been practicing yoga, but that's by the way. Mm. It is totally simply this practice. You do this practice and you just get them, you start to learn more about yourself.
And the practice focus, is that meditation practice? Is that chanting? Is that pranayama? What sort of things were emphasized from that teacher?
No, it's not. It's none of those. It's not pranayama. It does involve the breath, but it's more focus. It's more a focus that you put into. It's not something that if you want to find out more about it, you need to go and find out yourself.
You need to do it. You can't talk about it. You got to do it. I like that. Was it mainly just sitting? Is it mainly sitting?
The talking about it doesn't help, really. That's the thing, because there's a process that you need to go through, a process of unlearning. I think that's the thing.
Okay, let me ask you another question then. How much of it then is about the teacher and transmission between you and the teacher and being in the presence of the teacher, do you think?
How much is it? So again, how much is it about transition between in the present and
transmission, or like being in the presence of the teacher? Because a lot of times a lot gets communicated just being with the teacher. That's the harder part to find words for, you know?
Yes, I do. I agree with that. Well, in the beginning, when I started this, you know, there used to be programs with the teacher, with Maharaji, and he still travels the world, has spent most of his time traveling the world. And there are programs now, but of course they've got bigger and bigger, haven't they? And because there's so many thousands and thousands of people now who do this and all around the world. And we can go to programs, but now with the internet and everything, it's made it more easy to listen to his discourses. And you can access them as well if you wanted to. His discourses online, you know, and see him online. So, yes, I mean, there was in the beginning, I must say, there was a lot of guru worship. But I kind of fell into that because it all fitted with all the Indian stuff, you know, the pranam and the having the garlands of flowers and having darshan, as you say, you know, the transmission from the teacher to the student, what's known as darshan, which just means to just see. And all those things were they were amazing. They were amazing. And we used to have the holy festivals, which were where we'd all dress in white, and it'd be somewhere like in the middle of somewhere in Italy, middle of Rome, or somewhere in Barcelona, or in America too. We've been across to Miami a few times, to the Florida places there. And we'd have Holy Festival, which is where the water gets sprayed with coloured dye in it, and you end up multicoloured. And it's the most incredible experience of being like a child, I think, really. That childlike joy of just being covered in water and colour and dancing with your teacher.
That's beautiful. I've seen that ceremony before. I have not participated in it, though, but I love the way that you describe it, because it has that childlike, playful, and then you're just like kids coloring all over themselves. So, all right. So so you go from that class to studying with this teacher to finding this teacher. When along that does it start to be more like a job? Do you start to become a teacher? And when do you observe that happening? Is there like yoga centers opening up yet? Like, when do you start to see yoga emerging from just these gatherings with a guru to something else?
No, we didn't know. No, Jay, we didn't know yoga centers then. We had, like you said, we had village hall yoga. Village hall, yeah, it's very English, this. You've got to think, have you been to England?
I have been a few times. In fact, I have been to a class that someone who was hosting me taught at a town hall. That's little
it,
town hall.
Kind of town hall, village hall yoga. And also there was, when I started teaching, which was in 1982. So I took my teacher training course with an organization called Friends of Yoga, and I'm on the executive board of that organization still, actually. They have been a qualifying teaching organization in this country long before the British wheel.
I had not heard of Friends of Yoga. Maybe you could say a little bit more about that organization and how you got involved with it.
Well, Friends of Yoga, they're very interesting, really. It's run totally by volunteers. Nobody gets paid. You run your own classes and teacher training, and you run your own courses and charge what you like for those. But it's an association. I think we're got charitable status and stuff like that. And our purpose is to spread the word of yoga. But in the traditional teachings, we are based on the Yoga Sutra teachings. We always use those as our, we study the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. And we run teacher training courses, and we're there to provide traditional teachers throughout the country. That's our purpose.
Yeah, I read that the people who started Friends of Yoga also were founders of British Wheel Yoga. Is that correct?
Well, that is correct, but they don't acknowledge that anymore, the British Wheel. The British Wheel now have aligned themselves with the Sports Council.
Interesting.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yes,
we're still carrying on. We're still completely run by volunteers. Everybody puts their time in for no money at all, just expenses if you have any expenses, whatever.
Well,
but, I mean,
go ahead. Sorry, we're going to say.
No, I was going to say, to get back to what you said. So I trained in 1982. That question you asked about how did I end up then teaching other people. Well, I trained in 1982 with Friends of Yoga, because in those days it was it was like a correspondence course, basically. You had to be going to an accredited teacher somewhere. And then you just did like a thesis on yoga. They set the questions and you took 2 years to complete this thesis. And it was exhaustive. I've still got mine. It's really interesting. And it was all done handwritten because we didn't have computers then. I think I had a typewriter, funny old-fashioned typewriter. And then I passed and became a teacher. And my first class basically was for adult ed. We had a very good system. I don't know if you have anything similar in the States, but we used to have a system for adult learning in this country, which was part of all the sort of senior colleges around the country. They would have evening classes where people could go for, and they're all subsidized. So people could go for like some ridiculous cost, like £2.50. They could either have a yoga class, they could do cake decorating, flower arranging, they could learn accounting or do their GCSEs, or they could, just about everything you could think of. And the people who used to teach the classes, they didn't even have to particularly be qualified in those days or insured. You just turned up and did it, and you got paid for it. So I took over somebody's class. Somebody said, hey, I've got a class going. Do you want to come and take it? And I started at this community college teaching a group of people a 2-hour hatha yoga class. That's how I started.
And that hatha yoga class that you were teaching, was that based on your Shivananda experience, or was there an asana component to your Friends of Yoga training that you were drawing upon? Like, what was the hatha class that you started teaching?
It was based on the Shivananda, and it was based on those traditional postures that I would do. We didn't have much knowledge then about modifying for special needs or accommodating anybody who, if you could get down onto the floor, you could do it. Basically, that was it. Wouldn't think about whether or not somebody had high blood pressure or, all the stuff now that.
I know we could get to that. And also, I don't know, like what tradition you were in. Was there any sort of like hands-on assisting and the teacher coming over and putting you in the pose?
No, I've never gone in that route. I've never gone to doing that. I don't like that personally myself. I mean, now I might do that, adjust people, but it's a much more sensitive way because I've done lots more training since. And and we always find out whether people like that or not. But I do it more by demonstration. I did then as well, more by demonstration then. But there was always that thing, if you couldn't do something, then you couldn't do it, and that was it. It's totally different now, I think.
I think that's true. There was different sort of sentiment, and it was more intimidating, I would say, to go to a yoga class because if you couldn't do stuff, people, the big fear is I'm going to look dumb and I'm not going to be able to do stuff. But now we make people feel okay about that. Back then, they didn't necessarily make you feel okay about it.
Well, that's right. And the most flexible person, which I always was, they're the ones that got applauded.
That's right. That happened to me too. See,
aren't you clever being able to sort of lie your body on the floor in the wide leg forward bend or something like seated forward bend? How clever is that? Well, no, actually, that's called hypermobility. I know now. And the age I am now, I'm still incredibly flexible, but I know that if I hadn't practiced yoga, that hypermobility would have taken me into all sorts of instability in my later life had I not worked out, have been advised and to sort of strengthen my body rather than just go for the flexible stuff, the show off stuff.
That's right. And then I think also when you start, okay, so you decide to take on the role of being a teacher, and the same thing happened to me. I used to go to yoga classes all the time. And after this one yoga class, someone turned to me and says, "Hey, I have this class at the YMCA. I can't teach anymore. Do you want it?" And I said, "Sure." And that's how I started teaching, just like you. But then at some point you want to be true to it. You want to be good at it. And you sort of recognize, oh, I need to learn more. I need to study more if I want to be a good yoga teacher. So where do your studies go from there? Do you branch out into other approaches or find other teachers to help fill out more of your learning?
Yeah, I think the most, and I do know you're going to relate to this because I've had a look at some of your classes that you run, and you seem to have done some work with Krishnamacharya and Desikachar.
Yes, I would say people who listen to the show know that of all the teachers I've looked at. If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.